These orders soon became known. The king, challenged to yield, and having reflected on the responsibility which he was thus assuming in the ruin of his country, resigned himself at last to sign a treaty which was forced upon him. This treaty, which is dated March 16th, 1810, stipulated the cession to the Empire of the Dutch provinces situated on the right bank of the Scheldt, and the interdiction of all trade with England until such time as the English cabinet could have revoked its decrees in council. During these discussions, which had been so violent that an unpleasant issue could be expected, Marshal Oudinot had received orders to occupy the fortresses of Berg op Zoom and Breda. Amongst other documents relative to the struggle carried on by the King of Holland, Louis, against the Emperor in Paris, we will quote the following letter in spite of its length, because it is remarkable for the greatness of national sentiment which predominates in it, and because it epitomizes Napoleon's grievances at the attitude adopted by his brother. Sir, my brother, I have received your Majesty's letter. You desire me to make known to you what are my intentions with regard to Holland. I will do so frankly. When your Majesty ascended the throne of Holland, part of the Dutch nation desired its annexation to France. The esteem with which the history of this brave nation had inspired me prompted me to desire that it should keep its name and its independence. I wrote its constitution myself, and this was to be the basis of the throne of your Majesty, and I placed you on it. I hoped that, having been educated with me, you would have had for France that attachment which the nation has the right to expect from its children, and all the more from its princes. I hoped that brought up in my politics, you would have felt that Holland, which had been conquered by my people, owed her independence only to the generosity of France. That Holland, being weak without alliances, without an army, could and must be conquered on the day on which she should put herself into direct opposition with France. That she had no right to separate her policy from mine, and that finally Holland was bound to me by treaties. I hoped accordingly that in placing you on the throne of Holland, a prince of my blood, I had found the mean term which would conciliate the interests of the two states and unite them in a common interest and in a common hatred of England. And I was quite proud of having given to Holland what she needed, as by my act of mediation I had found what was needed by Switzerland. But I have not been long in finding out that I have been entertaining a vain illusion. My hopes have been deceived. Your Majesty, in ascending the throne of Holland, forgot that you are French, and even strained all the springs of your reasoning, and twisted the delicacy of your conscience to persuade yourself that you are Dutch. Those Dutchmen who are friendly disposed towards France have been neglected and persecuted. Those who have served England have been put forward. The French, from officer to the soldier, have been turned out, treated with disrespect, and I have had the pain of seeing the French name exposed to the shame in Holland under a prince of my own blood. However, the respect for and honor of the French name cannot with impunity be attacked, either by Holland or by anybody whatsoever. This honor and this respect lie next to my heart, and I have known how to bear it aloft on the bayonets of my soldiers. How badly your Majesty is disposed is showed in your speeches. In these one meets with nothing but disagreeable allusions to France. Instead of giving the example of forgetting the past, they consequently recall it, and by those means flatter the secret feelings and the passions of the enemies of France. And after all, about what do the Dutch complain? Were they not conquered by my arms? Do they not owe their independence to the generosity of my people? Should they not rather bless the generosity of France, which has constantly left open her canals and her custom houses to their commerce, which has made no other use of her conquests than to perfect them, and who until the present has employed her power only for the consolidation of their independence. Who then can have justified your Majesty's conduct, which is an insult to the nation and an offense to me? You must understand that I do not separate myself from my predecessors, and that from Clovis down to the Committee of Public Safety, I hold myself responsible for all. And whatever of evil is said lightheartedly against the governments which have preceded me, I hold to be said with the intention of offending me. I know it has become the fashion amongst certain people to praise me and to cry France down. But those who do not love France do not love me. And those who speak ill of my people, I hold them for my bitterest enemies. Had I only this one cause for discontentment, namely of seeing into what contempt the French name has fallen in Holland, the rights of my crown would have authorized me to declare war on a neighboring sovereign in whose states people allowed themselves to insult my nation. I did nothing of the kind. But your Majesty has been deceived as to my character. You have formed a false estimate of my goodness and my feelings towards you. You have violated every treaty which you have made with me. You have disarmed your fleets. You have discharged your sailors. You have disorganized your armies so that Holland finds herself without either army or a fleet, as those storehouses filled with goods and regiments of tradesmen and clerks could consolidate a power. Such things make a rich association, but there can be no king without finances, without assured means of recruiting, and without a fleet. Your Majesty has done more than this. You took advantage of the moment when I had troubles on the continent to allow the relations between Holland and England to be renewed, to violate the laws of the blockade, which is the only means of efficaciously injuring this power. I gave you a proof of my disapproval of this conduct in forbidding you France. I made you feel that without the assistance of my arms, by closing the Rhine, the Weser, the Scout, and the Meuse to Holland, I put your country in a more critical condition than if I had declared war upon you. That I isolated it in a way which meant its annihilation. This blow re-echoed in Holland. Your Majesty implored my generosity and appealed to my fraternal feelings, promising me a change of conduct. And I thought that this warning would suffice. I raised the customs prohibition when you very soon returned to your first system. It is true that at the time I was in Vienna, burdened with a heavy war. Your Majesty received every American ship which presented itself in the ports of Holland, though they were driven out of the ports of France. I was forced to close my custom houses to Dutch trade for a second time. Surely it would have been difficult to have made a more authentic declaration of war. In this state of things, we could consider ourselves as really at war. In my speech to the legislative body, I hinted at my displeasure, and I will not hide from you that it is my intention to annex Holland to France, both to add to my territory, to strike the most terrible blow in my power against England, and to deliver myself from the continual insults which the ringleaders of your cabinet never cease to direct against me. As a matter of fact, the mouth of the Rhine and the Meuse must belong to me. The principle in France that the valley of the Rhine is our frontier is a fundamental principle. Your Majesty writes to me in your letter of the 17th that you are sure of being able to prevent all trade between Holland and England, that you have finances, fleets, and armies, that you will reestablish the principles of the Constitution by giving no privileges to the nobility, by abolishing the rank of marshal, a rank which is only a caricature and quite incompatible with the power of the second order, that you will have the storehouses of colonial goods, and whatever may have been brought on American boats and ought not to have entered your ports seized upon. My opinion is that you are undertaking what you will not be able to carry out, and that the annexation of Holland to France is only being postponed. I will admit that I have no more interest in annexing to France the countries on the right bank of the Rhine, and that I have of annexing the Grand Duchy of Berg, and the Hanseatic cities. I can accordingly leave the right bank of the Rhine to Holland, and I will countermand the prohibition which I had ordered at my custom houses, and at all such time as the existing treaties which will be renewed shall be carried out. These are my demands. 1. Prohibition of all trade and all communication with England. 2. A fleet of 15 line vessels, 7 frigates, and 7 brigs or corvettes, armed and equipped. 3. A land army of 25,000 men. 4. Suppression of the rank of marshal. 5. Abolition of all the privileges of the nobility which are contrary to the Constitution which I gave and which I guaranteed. Your Majesty can negotiate through your ambassador on this basis with the Duke de Cador, but you must rest assured that on the admission of the first packet, the first vessel into Holland, I shall reestablish prohibition at my custom houses. That at the first insult which shall be made to my flag, I will have the officer who allows himself to insult my flag seized by force and hanged at the main mast. Your Majesty will find a brother in me if I find a Frenchman in you. If you forget the feelings which attach you to our common country, you will not think it wrong that I should forget the ties which nature has placed between us. To sum up, the annexation of Holland to France is what would be most useful to France, to Holland, and to the continent, because it is what would be most harmful to England. This annexation could be carried out by consent or by force. I have sufficient grievance against Holland to declare war. At the same time, I am quite ready to agree to an arrangement which would yield to me the Rhine as a frontier, and by which Holland would engage to fulfill the conditions stipulated above. Your affectionate brother, Napoleon. Given at Trianon, September 21st, 1809. The Emperor and the Empress left Compiègne at the end of April and stopped at Saint-Quentin, where Napoleon occupied himself with his usual activity, with details of government and the needs and resources of industry. His questions, which were always remarkable for their precision and exactness, showed how much he had these interests at heart. Their Majesties visited the canal and crossed the first part, which was not yet finished, in their carriage. The sovereigns then rode through the canal in the part into which the water had already been let in, for a distance of about a league and a half. 5 days were spent at Antwerp, which were employed by the emperor, who was on horseback from daybreak, in visiting the harbor works, the arsenal in all its details, and the fortifications, finally in reviewing the soldiers and inspecting the fleet. A ship of several decks, the largest of which had been constructed in this harbor, was launched. The authorities were presented to the emperor and empress. Napoleon conversed at length with them all, examining what reforms were possible. The empress showed herself affable, simple, and unpretentious towards everybody. The remembrance of Josephine's graces and her ardent desire to please perhaps injured Marie-Louise. Her reserve might have been attributed to the German dynastic pride, but this was not the case, and nobody could have been more simple or less haughty. It was her natural timidity and the novelty of the role which she was called upon to play, which alone gave her an appearance of stiffness. She had so completely identified herself with her new position and showed herself so touched by the kindness which the emperor showed her that when he proposed that she should wait for him at Antwerp during the tour which he intended to make in the Zealand Islands, she implored him to take her with him and not to fear the fatigue of the journey on her account. Napoleon accordingly left with her and went to visit one after the other Bois-le-Duc, Berg op Zoom, Breda, Middelburg, Flushing, and the island of Walcheren, which had been evacuated 4 months before by the English, after an expedition which had apparently been prepared for the sake of effecting a diversion which might be useful to Austria, but which, as a matter of fact, was undertaken to destroy the beautiful maritime and military establishments of Antwerp, which were so arised. The ire of England. Napoleon returned to the city by North and South Beveland, ascending the Escaut. He inspected the fortifications of these various strongholds in detail. So rapid and sure was his glance that merely by riding around the enceinte of a fort, often at a gallop, he noticed the weak points, and on his return could dictate notes which showed that he had not neglected the least important detail. After this journey, the emperor went and spent 3 days at the castle of Laeken. He left it on May 17th, passing through the towns of Ghent, Bruges, Ostend, Dunkirk, Lille, Calais, Boulogne, Dieppe, and Havre, rapidly ending his course at Rouen, where he spent 2 days. It is hardly necessary to add that he left behind him traces of his passage by acts of benevolence at these cities. The Empress was delighted with the really triumphant reception which she had received during the whole of the journey. She was received everywhere under triumphal arches and enjoyed all demonstrations which could flatter her. Popular enthusiasm, illuminations, balls, and fetes were everywhere lavished upon her. She had been able to appreciate the French character and to form an opinion that she would easily accustom herself to a country where the attachment in which Napoleon was held, the prodigious influence which he exercised there, the affection which he had for her, the affection which the population showed her on account of the emperor, made the new sovereign foresee such happy days. Napoleon, on his side, congratulated himself in having found in Marie Louise a companion to whom the very idea of intrigue was repugnant, who was discreet, and who thought but how to please him. The Grand Duke of Würzburg, the brother of the Emperor of Austria, the Queen of Naples, Caroline, and the King and Queen of Westphalia. Prince Eugene and the 2 Austrian ministers, Metternich and Schwarzenberg, accompanied the imperial couple on this journey. Their Majesties returned to St. Cloud on June 1st. This month was consecrated to splendid fetes, which the city of Paris, the Imperial Guard, and other corporations gave to the sovereigns. The people took their part in the public rejoicings, and in the interval, the emperor went with the empress to visit several public establishments, amongst others the National Library and the Zoological Gardens, and showed himself with her at the principal theaters. On July 1st, Prince Schwarzenberg offered a fete to their Majesties at the Austrian embassy. This fete became sadly notorious by the catastrophe which brought it to a close. A fire broke out in the principal ballroom. The imperial family, which was the object of the ambassador's first care, was soon placed in safety. Napoleon put the empress in the carriage and entered it himself to reassure her. But on arriving at the Champs-Élysées, he left her to continue to St. Cloud and returned to the embassy mansion to contribute by his presence in rescuing some victims from the flames. The particulars of this catastrophe are well known and were a sad diversion from the rejoicings which till then had been troubled by no accident. The remembrance of the calamity which saddened the marriage fetes of Louis XVI with Marie Antoinette was present in all minds, and the sad presentiments aroused anxiety, the passing impression of which was soon effaced by the prestige of Napoleon's fortune. The emperor's first care on the morrow was to send to ask for news of the persons who had suffered by this terrible accident. In the meanwhile, the Empress Josephine, after having passed the month of April at Navarre, had returned to La Malmaison, given up to profound melancholy. It was with difficulty that she could accustom herself to her new state. After her divorce, she retained the title and rank of Empress Queen and the enjoyment of a revenue of 3 million francs, and held a court at La Malmaison, where the same etiquette was observed as at the Tuileries. The emperor desired that she should continue to receive the persons of the court, the grand dignitaries, the ministers, and the principal authorities. To frequent La Malmaison was to please him. To divert Josephine from this melancholy, Napoleon advised her to go to the waters at the end of July, so she left for Aix in Savoy. After the season of the waters, she was anxious to visit Switzerland, which she did not know. But on arriving at Geneva Official advice from Paris caused her to fear that the emperor was seeking to remove her from France. She commissioned her daughter, Queen Hortense, to speak about the matter with him in a confidential manner. The emperor, who had not had the least idea of this and had only wished to give Josephine a change, hastened to write to reassure her. He advised her to go and see the viceroy at Milan, but gave her the choice between his journey and her return to Navarre, as he wished her to do what would best suit her. Josephine, under the impression of the fear with which she had been inspired, gave up her journey to Switzerland and made haste to return to Navarre, where she spent the rest of 1810 and the larger part of 1811. It was only in 1812 that she went to Milan to be present at the confinement of her daughter-in-law.